about gauge and swatches. Gauge is a measure of how many stitches are in a specific measurement in knitting. In this instance here, I have placed these pins 4 inches apart on each of these swatches. Swatches is simply this piece of knitting. In our case right now, they are rectangular pieces of knitting that I have done. Gauges can also sometimes, depending on the pattern, be a cylinder, a triangle, lots of different kinds. But the most common is a rectangular piece of knitting. I did a couple of rows of plain knit stitch, and then these middle rows are a row of purl followed by a row of knitting. And that's what gives you these little V's in there. As you can see, it's pretty easy to see that this swatch is bigger than this swatch. They were made with the same yarn, but 2 different size needles. The smaller one was made with this needle, it's size 10.5. The larger swatch was made with this bigger needle, size 17. When you're looking at a pattern, the author of the pattern will put in the pattern what gauge you need to reach in order to get the same size that they did when they were making the item. And this is important because you can see that if you cast on the same number of stitches with the larger needles as you did the smaller needles, you're going to get 2 very different pieces of knitting for your end product in very different sizes. So in this one, I have a gauge of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.5 stitches per 4 inches. In this one, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches per 4 inches. How we would be sure we get the right size needles for our project is in the pattern, the author will suggest a needle size. So let's say in this case, we have 8.5 stitches with our 10.5. If the author suggested you use 10.5, that's what I would recommend you do your first swatch with. You'll knit a swatch, you will wash it as you would the finished product, let it dry, and then go ahead and measure it. We had 8.5 stitches here. If the pattern called for 6 stitches, we would know that we needed a bigger needle. Sorry, you can hear my pup over there having a moment. If you needed 6 stitches, I mean, we already know from my example that we would go up to the size 17 needles. But if you didn't know that, you would just simply go up to the next size needle, repeat the process. You would make a swatch, wash it, dry it, measure it again. If you have too many stitches, you go up in needle size. If you have too few stitches, you will go down in a needle size to achieve the right gauge. You may have to do this process 2 or 3 times in order to find the needle size that's right for you. And every pattern will have its own gauge. So you will need to do this for every pattern that you need it to fit someone. When we did our cowl, there was no knitting swatch because if it was a little bit wider, a little bit narrower, who cares? It's a scarf. And then we measured the length just kind of as we went along. But if you're making a sweater especially, or maybe a hat that you needed to fit a specific person, you would need to do a gauge swatch to make sure that the end result is the size that you need it to be.